I want you to try a thought experiment. It's a bit dark, but stick with me here.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So imagine you're just living your life right, going to school or working your job, minding your own business, and suddenly your entire country is invaded by a massive foreign superpower.
Oh, wow. Yeah, dark start.
Right. And your city is besieged for months. The walls are finally breached, the streets are just filled with violence, and everything you know, like every institution you ever trusted, is burned to the ground.
It's basically the ultimate nightmare scenario of, systemic displacement.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. You aren't killed. Instead, because you happen to be young, well-educated, and from a prominent family, you are selected.
Oh, so you're singled out.
Yeah, and it gets worse. You are forcibly relocated hundreds of miles away to the capital of this hostile global empire.
Just completely uprooted.
Completely. You're stripped of your identity. They give you a new name in a new language, and then you're enrolled in their elite, state-sponsored re-education program.
Which is just, psychological warfare at that point.
Totally. Because the goal isn't just to educate you. The goal is to mold you into a compliant middle manager for the very regime that just destroyed your home. So the question is, how do you survive that?
Yeah, how do you not just break?
Right. How do you live in the absolute center of hostile, overwhelming power without, entirely losing your soul?
You are basically describing an environment designed to completely erase a human being.
Yeah.
The psychological pressure to assimilate just to survive day to day would be unimaginable. You either become them or you die.
Which makes it all the more wild that this exact scenario isn't some dystopian science fiction. It is the literal historical reality that kicks off one of the most debated, fascinating, and frankly, mind-bending documents from the ancient world.
It really is a staggering text.
Today, we are taking a deep dive into a really comprehensive stack of sources. We're anchoring this on the Survey of the Book of Daniel by Chris R. Velasquez.
Which is a fantastic foundational overview.
Yeah, and we're also pulling in critical insights from Britannica, some heavy historical and linguistic analysis from Biola University, and honestly, some truly incredible archaeological records.
To give us a complete multi-layered picture, right?
Exactly, because this ancient text demands it. Our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how all these different frequencies interact. We're going to unpack the Book of Daniel not just as some dusty religious artifact, but as a genuine masterclass in surviving imperial pressure.
And it requires that multi-layered approach because Daniel is a text that flat out refuses to sit neatly in one category.
Yeah.
It operates on several different frequencies at once.
Yeah, we're going to examine its bizarre bilingual literary structure, and we are going to see how it acts as the absolute bedrock for understanding both historical resistance and apocalyptic visions. Okay, let's unpack this, because I promise you, even if you have vague memories of the sanitized Sunday school version.
Ah, the guy sitting happily with some tame lions.
Yes. The petting zoo version. The actual history, the geopolitical tension, and the structural genius of this book will blow your mind.
Those sanitized versions really do the text a massive disservice. They turn a gritty, high-stakes narrative of political coercion and spiritual resistance into a cartoon.
It's so true. So to really grasp what this survivor's manual is trying to do, we first have to look at the machinery of the manual itself.
Because the construction of the Book of Daniel is completely unique, it is built like an incredibly complex puzzle box.
When you say puzzle box, my mind immediately goes to the genre.
Yeah.
Because you sit down to read this 12-chapter book, assuming it's going to be a straightforward story,
Sure.
And very quickly you realize it has a totally fractured identity.
Right. It is a radical hybrid. The first half, chapters 1 through 6, is made up of what scholars call court tales.
Court tales, like palace intrigue.
Exactly. They are diaspora stories of survival. They are third-person narratives about Daniel and his friends navigating the highly dangerous, deadly politics of the Babylonian and later the Persian royal courts.
So they read almost like historical political thrillers.
Very much so. There is intrigue, there are decrees, there are executions. It's very grounded in the earthly courts.
But then you turn the page to chapter 7 and the whole world just turns upside down. The narrative structure just vanishes.
It plunges you straight into the deep end of the apocalyptic pool. Chapters 7 through 12 shift from third-person stories about Daniel into first-person accounts from Daniel.
Oh, so he starts speaking directly.
Yeah, and he is detailing these bizarre, terrifying visions of mutant animals crawling out of the sea, massive heavenly courtrooms, and literal angelic warfare happening behind the scenes of human history.
It's like you're reading a tense political drama set in the White House. And halfway through, someone hands you a surrealist graphic novel about cosmic monsters.
That is a perfect way to describe it. It's incredibly jarring.
But as weird as that genre shift is, I don't think it's the strangest structural element. The language itself is broken. We need to look at what scholars call the Aramaic sandwich.
Yes, the Aramaic sandwich. The linguistic division of Daniel is one of its most distinctive and frankly brilliant literary signals. The book is completely bilingual.
Let me put this in modern terms for you, the listener, because it's just so strange. Imagine you go to the movie theater. The movie starts in English, right? You settle in, you're following the plot.
Everything is normal.
Right. Then, right in the middle of a scene in the first act, a character starts speaking Spanish. And suddenly, the entire movie, the dialogue, the narration, the subtitles, everything switches to Spanish.
And it stays that way for a long time.
It stays in Spanish for the entire middle act of the film. And then for the final act, it abruptly switches back to English for the climax.
That is exactly what Daniel does.
It starts in Hebrew, up to chapter 2, verse 4a. Then right in the middle of a sentence, it switches entirely to Aramaic. And it stays in Aramaic all the way through chapter 7.
Then at chapter 8, it flicks back to Hebrew for the remainder of the book.
Why on earth would an author deliberately fracture the language of a text like this? I mean, is it just a sloppy editing job? Like someone stapled two different scrolls together and hoped nobody would notice?
Well, that was actually an early theory, but the analysis from Biola University points to a much deeper intentionality. What's fascinating here is how this Aramaic sandwich perfectly maps onto the theology of the book.
Okay, how so?
Well, Aramaic was the lingua franca of the ancient Near East. It was the language of international trade, diplomacy, and the royal courts of the Babylonian and Persian empires.
So if you were doing imperial business, you were speaking Aramaic.
Exactly. Hebrew, however, was the heritage language. It was the intimate covenant language of the Jewish people.
Oh, I see where this is going. So you're saying the language matches the scope of the message being delivered in those specific chapters.
Precisely. Look at the Aramaic section. Chapters 2 through 7, what is the content? These chapters are entirely focused on global imperial powers.
Right, the statues, the beasts.
Yeah, they detail the succession of earthly kingdoms, the arrogance of human kings, and God's sovereign judgment over the entire known world. It is a universal message delivered in the universal language of the empire.
Ah, so when the text is speaking to the destiny of the massive global empires, it literally uses the empire's language to do it.
Yes. But the Hebrew sections, chapter 1 and chapters 8 through 12, are highly localized. They focus on the specific covenant fate, the desecration of the Jewish sanctuary, and the apocalyptic future of God's people.
So when the text speaks to the intimate, agonizing future of the covenant people, it returns to their native tongue.
Exactly. It's a deliberate literary device that signals to the reader exactly whose fate is being discussed.
That is structural genius. It's not an accident at all. It's a feature. And this dual nature, part narrative, part vision, part Hebrew, part Aramaic, it actually creates a massive headache for people trying to categorize it.
Oh, absolutely. Depending on which Bible you open, Daniel is in a completely different section.
Right, because the Britannica materials explicitly note this canonical bifurcation.
They do. If you look at the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, Daniel is placed in a section called the Ketuvim, which translates to the writings.
Which means it sits alongside books like Psalms, Proverbs, and the historical books of Ezra and Nehemiah.
Yes. It is notably not placed in the Nevi'im or the prophets.
Which feels completely backward if you grew up in a Christian tradition.
Hmm.
I mean, in the Christian Bible, Daniel is grouped right alongside Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. He is considered one of the major prophets.
Right, it's a very different placement.
So what is the logic behind keeping a guy who has literal visions of the future out of the prophet section in the Hebrew canon?
It comes down to how different traditions understood the primary function of the book within their historical timeline. Placing Daniel in the writings highlights its role as wisdom literature.
Wisdom literature.
Okay. In this view, Daniel is presented as a paradigmatic wise man, someone who navigates the lethal complexities of foreign exile with divine insight. You see, the books of Kings and Jeremiah narrated the catastrophic failure of the covenant and the trauma of the exile.
They explain how the nation fell apart.
Right. And Daniel picks up that historical thread and acts as a bridge. It answers the burning question: has God completely abandoned us now that we are dominated by these foreign beasts?
And placing it in the writings gives a specific answer to that.
Exactly. The placement in the writings emphasizes the answer. No, God preserves a faithful remnant through wisdom, and these empires are only temporary.
So the Hebrew canon sees it primarily as a manual for survival and wisdom in the present exile.
Precisely. The Christian canonical placement among the prophets, however, leans much more heavily on the second half of the book, chapters 7 through 12.
The apocalyptic stuff.
Yes. Early Christian compilers viewed Daniel primarily through an eschatological and Christological lens, meaning they saw it as heavily anticipating the end of days and the coming of the Messiah.
Okay, so we have this bilingual puzzle box that acts as a bridge between historical trauma and future hope. But all of this complexity, the dual languages, the intense granular detail of the historical empires, the vivid prophecies, this drops us right into what has to be one of the most fiercely fought radioactive debates in all of biblical scholarship.
Oh, you mean the timeline tug of war?
Yes.
No.
When was this book actually written? Because we need to lay out the scholarly positions provided in our sources with rigorous neutrality here, because how you date Daniel radically shifts how you read its entire genre.
It really does. It changes everything about how you interpret the text.
Let's lay the cards on the table. On one side, you have the traditional or evangelical view. This view argues that the book originates exactly where it claims it does.
Right, in the 6th century BCE, during the Babylonian exile.
Yeah, written by the historical Daniel, a real guy working in the royal court. And crucially, if this is true, it means the wild apocalyptic visions in the second half of the book are a genuine, miraculous predictive prophecy.
He is literally seeing the rise and fall of Greek and Roman empires centuries before they even exist.
Exactly. But on the other side, you have the critical mainstream view, which Britannica outlines as the dominant academic consensus today.
And this view argues that the final form of the book was composed hundreds of years later, specifically in a very narrow window between 167 and 164 BCE.
So wait, what was happening right then that makes scholars pinpoint those exact 3 years? Like, why so specific?
It was the peak of the Seleucid crisis. Judea was being brutally suppressed by a Greek king named Antiochus Defile Epiphanes.
And this wasn't just casual suppression, right?
No, we're talking about intense, violent persecution. He was banning Jewish practices, burning Torah scrolls, and physically desecrating the temple in Jerusalem.
Okay, so in this critical view, an anonymous author took older, perhaps oral court tales about a legendary wise man named Daniel and combined them with newly written apocalyptic visions.
Exactly, to encourage the Jews who were currently being slaughtered under Antiochus.
Okay, hold on. I have to play devil's advocate. If I pick up a book and the first sentence is basically, I, Daniel, was living in Babylon in the 600s, why are mainstream scholars bending over backward to say it was actually written in Judea 4 centuries later?
What's the smoking gun?
Yeah. What makes them completely disregard the text's own claim about when it was written?
The smoking gun is chapter 11.
Okay, chapter 11.
When you read Daniel 11, it provides a breathtakingly detailed historical panorama of the geopolitical struggles between the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt and the Seleucid Empire in Syria.
The text refers to them as the king of the south and the king of the north, right?
Yes. And it details their specific treaties, political marriages, betrayals, and massive wars. And this all culminates in the rise of a specific violent king who desecrates the sanctuary.
And that perfectly matches the career of Antiochus Epiphanes in the 160s BCE.
Exactly.
I mean, I've read that section, and the details are so granular it reads less like a mystical vision and more like a literal history textbook.
That intense precision is exactly the crux of the debate. For critical scholars, this level of minute geopolitical detail indicates a literary device known as vaticinium ex eventu.
Which means?
Prophecy after the fact. They argue it is simply historical fact, written as if it were future prophecy.
Okay, but why do that? Why not just write a history book?
Because it was a common, ancient literary device used to lend divine authority to a text intended to comfort an oppressed people. They are essentially saying, look, God knew this Antiochus crisis was coming all along, so hold fast, the end of this tyrant is near.
I see. But I imagine traditionalists don't buy the prophecy after the fact argument at all.
Not at all.
They must view that exact same precision as proof of something else entirely.
They view it as evidence of the miraculous nature of divine revelation. Traditionalist and evangelical scholars argue that if God is truly sovereign over history, which is the explicit beating heart of the book of Daniel, then he is perfectly capable of revealing the specific details of the Ptolemaic and Seleucid wars to a prophet in the 6th century BCE.
So they see it as authentic foreknowledge.
Yes. They push back on the critical view, arguing that assuming it must be written after the fact brings a fundamental anti-supernatural bias to the text.
Wow, it's a massive methodological divide. Does intense specificity imply retrospective history, or does it showcase miraculous foresight?
It's the central tension of studying the book.
And just to make it more complicated, Biola University notes a third option, a moderate academic view.
Right, which tries to thread the needle.
Yeah, this group suggests the narrative preserves authentic, historical 6th century source materials and actual memories from the exile, but that the book, as a complete bilingual puzzle box, was edited and polished into its final form at a later date.
And that moderate view gains a lot of traction when we stop looking at the theology and start digging into the dirt.
Oh, yes. Let's get into the dirt, because this is where the historical debate gets physical.
The archaeology gets incredibly layered and fascinating here.
For a very long time, early skeptical scholars would point to the book of Daniel, specifically chapter 5, and just laugh.
Because of Belshazzar.
Exactly. Chapter 5 talks about a king of Babylon named Belshazzar throwing a massive feast right before the empire falls. But the skeptics said, we have the official Babylonian king lists. The last king of Babylon was a man named Nabonidus.
Right. They said Belshazzar does not exist?
Yeah, they claimed he was a fictional character, which proved Daniel was just a historical romance written centuries later by someone who didn't even know Babylonian history.
And that was a highly confident, prevailing scholarly view. I mean, it was considered a closed case.
Until
the archaeologists started digging up cuneiform tablets in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Just to clarify for anyone who hasn't been to a museum recently, cuneiform tablets are those chunks of clay where ancient scribes pressed wedge-shaped reeds into the mud before it baked. Right?
Exactly. It was basically the administrative hard drive of the ancient world. And our source highlights specific artifacts now housed in the British Museum, primarily the Nabonidus Chronicle and related administrative tablets.
And what do they find on these clay hard drives?
When scholars translated these clay records, they proved definitively that Belshazzar was not a fiction. He was a very real historical figure. He was the eldest son of King Nabonidus.
And the plot thickens. Because Nabonidus, for various religious and political reasons that irritated the priests in Babylon, decided he didn't want to live in the capital anymore.
Right. He went on this bizarre decade-long retreat to an oasis in Arabia.
And who did he leave in charge of the empire while he was gone?
His son, Belshazzar. The cuneiform tablets explicitly state that Nabonidus entrusted the kingship to him as a co-regent.
This historical revelation provided a stunning vindication of a very specific, previously confusing detail in the biblical text.
Oh, the reward in chapter 5.
Yes. In Daniel chapter 5, during that infamous feast, Belshazzar is terrified by the mystical writing appearing on the wall. In his panic, he offers a massive reward to anyone who can translate it.
He declares whoever reads this writing shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom.
The third ruler. I always thought that was such a weirdly specific number. I mean, think about it. In the story of Joseph in Egypt, Pharaoh makes Joseph second in command.
Right, the number 2 spot.
Yeah, and in the book of Esther, Mordecai becomes second to the king. It's always the number 2 spot. Why is Belshazzar offering the bronze medal?
Well, before the tablets were found, nobody knew. It was a mystery. But once the British Museum translated those Babylonian administrative records, it suddenly made perfect sense.
Because Belshazzar wasn't number 1.
Exactly. Belshazzar could only offer the third position because he himself was currently occupying the second position. His absent father Nabonidus was technically king number 1. Belshazzar was the acting regent, number 2.
So the highest position he legally had the authority to give away was number 3. That is wild. And that is exactly the kind of authentic historical memory that the moderate and traditional scholars point to. They argue, how on earth would a Jewish scribe, allegedly making up a story 400 years later in Judea, know the exact strange, hierarchical idiosyncrasies of the Neo-Babylonian court just months before it fell?
It's a highly compelling point. You really can't brush it off easily, and it's not the only one.
What else do we have?
We also have the Jehoiachin ration tablets.
Ration tablets.
Yeah, these are Babylonian lists that literally record the specific rations of oil and grain given to the exiled Judean king Jehoiachin and his sons.
Oh, wow. So it proves they were really there.
It perfectly corroborates the socio-economic reality depicted in Daniel 1, that royal captives from Judah were kept in the Babylonian court and provided daily provisions from the king's own administration.
Like find the ancient grocery receipts.
Literally. We also have the Cyrus Cylinder, which is a Persian royal proclamation that confirms the Persian policy of repatriating captive peoples and restoring their local cults.
Which completely contextualizes the massive transition of imperial power in Daniel 6.
Exactly.
So, the physical artifacts prove that the historical setting of the court tales is deeply grounded in reality. But archaeology also weighs in on the other side of the timeline tug-of-war, right? Through the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes, the Dead Sea Scrolls are crucial to this debate because they are the oldest known physical copies of the biblical text.
Our source mentions a recent 2025 study published in PLOS1, which is a massive peer-reviewed scientific megajournal.
Right, and they ran new radiocarbon dating on one of the Daniel manuscripts found at Qumran, specifically a fragment known as 4Q114.
And there are, what, 8 different Daniel manuscripts found in those caves?
Yes, showing just how wildly popular the book was. But the PLOS1 study redated manuscript 4Q114, placing its physical creation in a window between 230 and 160 BCE.
Wait, if the physical manuscript dates right to the middle of the Antiochus crisis in the 160s BCE, doesn't that just hand the ultimate victory to the critical scholars? Doesn't that prove it was written then?
Well, not necessarily, and this is where the debate gets highly technical. Skeptics of the critical view caution that the radiocarbon date of a physical manuscript copy does not equal the date of the original composition.
Ah, I see.
Think of it this way. If I hand you a paperback copy of a Shakespeare play printed in 2024, it doesn't mean Shakespeare wrote it in 2024.
Right, it just means that specific physical piece of paper is from 2024.
Precisely. The traditionalists argue that the PLOS1 dating simply proves that the Book of Daniel was already circulating, considered authoritative, and being actively copied by Jewish communities during the Antiochus crisis.
Okay, so the tug-of-war continues, and clearly both sides have heavy artillery. But regardless of whether the final editor laid down their pen in the 6th century or the 2nd century BCE, the narrative itself drops us into a very real, historically grounded trauma.
It drops us right into the Babylonian exile.
So let's leave the dating debate behind for a minute and look at the actual survival manual. How did these deported teenagers actually survive the empire in the first 6 chapters?
To understand chapters 1 through 6, we have to recognize that the empire is running a highly sophisticated playbook. Daniel chapter 1 outlines a calculated strategy of imperial assimilation.
We touched on this in our thought experiment earlier.
Right. Moving these youths from Jerusalem to Babylon wasn't just logistics. It was about fundamentally rewiring their identity.
I think the best modern analogy for this is a hostile corporate takeover.
Oh, I like that.
Think about it. Imagine your small local company is bought out by a massive, aggressive, global conglomerate. The new bosses don't just want you to work for them. They want to erase your past company culture entirely.
They want you to bleed their corporate colors.
Yes, they move you to their sleek headquarters. They put you in their specific management training program. They dictate your dress code. They even change your job title and insist you use their corporate jargon.
They try to mold you into a compliant middle manager who serves only their bottom line.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, multiply the stakes of that by 1,000. Add the threat of state-sponsored execution, and that is Daniel 1. How do you resist when the empire controls your food, your education, and your very name?
Well, the empire's strategy is totalizing. First, they target the elite youth, the nobility, the ones with the most potential to lead a future rebellion, and they isolate them in the capital.
Cut off the head of the snake.
Exactly. Second, they re-educate them in the literature and language of the Chaldeans. This isn't just learning a new alphabet. It is replacing their theology and worldview with Babylonian state ideology.
Total indoctrination.
And third, and most insidiously, they change their names.
Talk to me about the names, because in the ancient world, your name is your destiny.
It really is. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are names that all contain the linguistic markers of the Hebrew God El and Yah.
Right.
For example, Daniel means God is my judge.
A constant reminder of who they belong to.
Yes. But the Babylonians strip these away and give them Babylonian names. Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These new names invoke Babylonian deities like Bel and Nebo.
So every time someone calls to them in the hallway, They're being forced to honor a Babylonian god.
It is a psychological attempt to sever their covenant identity every single time someone calls them by name.
That is just brutal.
And finally, the fourth step. They integrate them into the royal ration system, providing them with food and wine from the king's own table.
Which brings us to the first major flashpoint, the diet. In chapter 1, Daniel and his 3 friends resolve not to defile themselves with the royal food and wine. They ask the chief official for a diet of vegetables and water.
Right.
Now, growing up, I always heard this taught as some sort of ancient health kick. Like, Daniel was the first guy to try a plant-based cleanse, and because he ate his veggies, he got strong and outsmarted the Babylonians.
Yeah, the whole Daniel fast phenomenon.
Exactly. But the text is absolutely not giving us a nutritional manual, is it?
Not at all. This is a profound issue of honor, shame, and civil disobedience. Yes, the royal food was likely sacrificed to Babylonian idols or prepared in ways that violated Jewish dietary laws.
So it's unkosher.
Right, but more deeply than that, eating from the king's table in the ancient Near East was an act of profound political and religious dependence.
It was a statement.
Yes, it was a public acknowledgement that the Babylonian king was the ultimate source of your life, your status, and your sustenance.
So by rejecting the food, Daniel is essentially rejecting the king as his ultimate provider.
He is making a highly dangerous, calculated choice. By relying on vegetables and water, he is signaling, my identity and my sustenance come from my covenant with Yahweh, not from the patronage of the emperor.
Wow.
It is a quiet, nonviolent, but incredibly radical act of resistance.
And it completely sets the tone for the entire book. It proves that being in exile doesn't cancel your covenant identity.
But the stakes escalate incredibly fast.
Oh, they absolutely do. In chapter 3, we move from vegetables to the furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar builds a massive golden image 90 feet high and demands that all government officials bow down to it whenever the royal symphony plays.
It is state-sponsored, mandated idolatry.
And Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, now known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they flat out refuse.
This is one of the most powerful paradigms of civil disobedience in ancient literature. The king is furious. He brings them forward and gives them one last chance, explicitly threatening to throw them into a blazing furnace.
He literally says, "Who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?"
And their response is just iconic. They don't beg for their lives. They don't try to negotiate a compromise like, we'll bow physically but pray to Yahweh in our hearts.
Pomp half measures.
None. They look the most powerful man in the world in the eye and say, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand.
But then comes the kicker, the greatest pivot in the entire narrative. They say, but even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up.
Even if he does not. That single phrase absolutely destroys the logic of the empire.
How so? Like, why does that phrase dismantle it?
Because the empire operates on the fundamental premise that power, survival, and physical safety are the ultimate human values.
Basically, I can kill you, therefore you must obey me.
Exactly. Nebuchadnezzar assumes that the threat of agonizing death will automatically coerce compliance. But these 3 young men declare that their loyalty to God supersedes their desire to live.
They're willing to accept public shame, torture, and execution because they recognize a higher authority than the state.
Yes, God miraculously delivers them in the narrative, but their faithfulness was explicitly not contingent on that rescue. They dismantled the king's leverage before the fire was even lit.
It's a total rejection of the idea that whoever holds the sword makes the rules. And this core theme, who actually holds ultimate power drives, chapters 4 and 5, where we see 2 different Babylonian kings deal with pride and divine judgment.
Let's look at Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4.
Yeah, he is walking on the roof of his massive palace, looking down at Babylon, and he says to himself, "Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power, as a royal residence and for the glory of my majesty?"
It is the ultimate intoxicating expression of human self-exaltation. He is claiming divine-like credit for the empire, completely forgetting that he is just a temporary steward of power.
And the judgment is swift and, frankly, deeply humiliating.
Hmm.
A voice from heaven declares his authority is stripped away.
He is driven away from human society, he loses his sanity, and lives out in the wild, literally eating grass like an ox.
The guy is literally out in the royal gardens, chewing on the lawn. It sounds like clinical boanthropy or like canthropy, a psychological break where someone believes they are an animal. It's a complete humiliation. The most powerful man in the known world is reduced to the status of a beast.
And that imagery, a human ruler acting like a beast, is a massive, deliberate foreshadowing for the apocalyptic visions later in the book.
Well, that's a great connection.
But the immediate theological point is clear. Earthly power is always unconditionally accountable to heaven. Nebuchadnezzar remains in this beastly state until he finally lifts his eyes to heaven and acknowledges that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes.
And once he humbles himself, his sanity and his kingdom are restored.
Which makes the contrast with Belshazzar in chapter 5 so incredibly tragic.
Because Belshazzar clearly doesn't learn from history. While his father is off in Arabia and the Medo-Persian army is literally outside the city walls, Belshazzar throws a massive feast.
Right. The enemy is at the gates and he's partying.
And in an act of deliberate, arrogant sacrilege, he orders his servants to bring out the sacred gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar had looted from the temple in Jerusalem decades earlier.
He and his nobles drink wine from these sacred vessels while praising the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone.
It's like an arrogant tech billionaire throwing a frat party and using priceless museum artifacts as beer pong cups just to show he can.
It is the ultimate profanation of sacred space and sacred objects. He is taking the physical representation of Yahweh's covenant and using it to toast his pagan idols.
And the response from heaven is terrifyingly immediate. The fingers of a disembodied human hand appear and write directly on the plaster of the wall in the banquet hall.
The party stops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The king is so terrified his knees are literally knocking together.
Yeah.
Daniel is brought in to interpret the mysterious Aramaic words. Men, mene, tekel, person.
Numbered, weighed, divided.
That's a chilling phrase.
This is literal, unyielding courtroom language. Daniel looks at this arrogant regent and delivers the verdict. God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting.
And your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians.
Belshazzar is judged, and the text coldly, abruptly notes that that very night, Belshazzar was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom.
It's a stark warning. Judgment can come suddenly on profane power. The empire you trust in can fall overnight.
Which leads us to the final court tale, chapter 6, the famous story of Daniel in the lion's den.
Right, and this happens under the new Medo-Persian administration. Daniel is a high official, but his political rivals manipulate the new king into signing an irrevocable decree that no one can pray to any god or human except the king for 30 days.
It's a classic bureaucratic trap.
Exactly. Once again, we see the state attempting to coerce religious devotion and usurp the place of the divine.
The king is demanding to be the sole mediator between heaven and earth.
And Daniel's response is another masterclass in principled non-compliance. He doesn't organize an armed revolt. He doesn't protest in the streets. What does he do?
He goes home to his upstairs room where the windows open toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he gets down on his knees and prays, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before.
He doesn't hide his faith, but he doesn't change his routine to be needlessly provocative either. I think we so often frame The Lion's Den as a superhero story about a magical escape from hungry animals.
Right, missing the point entirely.
Yeah, because at its core, it's a story about prayer functioning as radical political resistance. Daniel's refusal to start praying is a quiet, devastating declaration that the king's law is not ultimate.
But the king's authority stops at the door of the conscience.
Exactly. And while God shuts the mouths of the lions and vindicates Daniel, the narrative stresses his unyielding integrity.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the entire first half of the book is demonstrating one theological reality. God uses pagan rulers, he allows massive empires to rise and fall, but he humbles them the exact moment they claim divine status.
Earthly politics are entirely subordinate to the sovereignty of heaven.
Exactly.
Okay, so for 6 chapters, we watch Daniel and his friends survive the beastly, arrogant behavior of human kings. They navigate the shifting sands of Babylon and Persia with wisdom, integrity, and faith. But then we turn the page to chapter 7.
Oh boy.
Use my catchphrase here because here's where it gets really interesting. The curtain is pulled back. We shift from these grounded third-person stories of court intrigue to first-person, mind-bending apocalyptic visions.
And the earthly kings are revealed to actually be beasts.
The shift in genre is violently jarring, and it's entirely meant to be.
Apocalyptic literature uses highly symbolic, often bizarre imagery to unveil the spiritual realities operating behind earthly events. It's pulling the matrix back.
Let's talk about chapter 7. Daniel has a vision of the sea churning, whipped up by the 4 winds of heaven and 4 massive, terrifying beasts emerge.
The sea in ancient Near Eastern thought is highly symbolic. It represents chaos, the anti-creation forces, the abyss. These beasts emerging from the sea represent four successive human empires.
The source material outlines them, and the imagery is wild. The first beast is Babylon, represented as a lion with eagle's wings.
The second is Medo-Persia, a lopsided bear with 3 ribs in its mouth like its mid-meal.
The third is Greece, a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. And the fourth beast.
It doesn't even correspond to an animal in nature.
It's just a terrifying iron-toothed monster that crushes and tramples everything in its path, which scholars debate as representing either the Roman Empire or some future eschatological kingdom.
But the overwhelming sense is just pure violence.
It is violent because it is exposing the true, unvarnished nature of human empire. From the outside, earthly empires look like Nebuchadnezzar's golden statue in chapter 2. Impressive, wealthy, glorious, something to be admired. But from heaven's perspective.
From heaven's perspective, revealed here in chapter 7, these empires are predatory, irrational, destructive beasts. They conquer, they consume, they devour ribs, and they destroy. They are anti-human.
But then the vision shifts. We look away from the chaos of the beasts, and the camera pans up to a heavenly courtroom. Thrones are set in place, and the Ancient of Days takes his seat.
The text says his clothing is white as snow, the hair of his head is like pure wool, and his throne is flaming with fire with wheels of burning fire.
It is a scene of absolute, unshakable divine authority. The beasts are judged. The terrifying fourth beast is slain and thrown into the fire.
And then comes arguably the most important paradigm-shifting few verses in the entire book.
Yes. Daniel says, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence."
He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed.
One like a son of man. Let's camp here for a minute, because this is massive. The Aramaic term used is bar inash. Why is this figure, this son of man, so radically significant?
What is fascinating here is the deliberate contrast. The human empires, built by men, are represented by mutant beasts, but the one who receives the eternal, true kingdom from God is like a son of man. He is a human figure.
So true humanity is restored.
Yes. True humanity exactly as God intended it to rule over creation back in Genesis, is finally restored in this figure. But there is a massive theological twist.
Which is?
This human figure also comes with the clouds of heaven. In the Old Testament, right around the clouds is imagery exclusively, unconditionally reserved for Yahweh, for God himself.
Wow.
So this Son of Man is a deeply mysterious figure who is somehow both human and divine, who shares the unparalleled authority of the Ancient of Days, and who receives the worship of all nations.
It's an incredible subversion of expectations. The empires act like beasts, but the ultimate ruler is truly human and divine.
And the text also says that the saints of the Most High, the Kadijin in Aramaic, will receive the kingdom along with him. The suffering, marginalized, faithful people who are being crushed by the beasts will ultimately be vindicated.
But the visions also make it brutally clear that this vindication will not come without intense, prolonged suffering first.
As we move into chapters 8 and 11, the imagery shifts from beasts to a ram and a goat, which the angel explicitly identifies as the kings of Media, Persia, and Greece.
And out of the Greek Empire emerges a little horn, a king of bold face who understands riddles.
And this is the figure that maps so closely onto Antiochus V Epiphanes, the Greek king who caused the massive crisis in the 2nd century BCE.
The text describes him attacking the beautiful land, exalting himself as high as the prince of the heavenly host, taking away the daily sacrifice, and setting up a rebellion that causes absolute desolation in the sanctuary.
He literally set up an altar to Zeus in the Jewish temple and sacrificed pigs on it.
Which is just the ultimate insult.
It is, and this raises a vital point about how the ancient world viewed reality. We moderns tend to view politics and religion as two completely separate spheres.
Right, church and state.
The author of Daniel absolutely does not. To desecrate the temple in Jerusalem to stop the daily sacrifices is not just a political act of suppression, it is an act of literal cosmic warfare.
Because the temple isn't just a building.
Exactly. The sanctuary was considered the intersection of heaven and earth, God's footstool. By polluting it, this arrogant earthly king is declaring physical war on the sovereignty of God himself.
The desecration of sacred space is an existential threat to the covenant people.
Ah.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the beast's power.
And this overwhelming sense of prolonged suffering, of wondering when God is going to intervene, brings us to chapter 9.
Daniel is reading the scrolls of the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah had prophesied that the desolation of Jerusalem and the exile would last exactly 70 years.
Daniel does the math, realizes that the 70 years are almost up, and so he begins to pray.
And it's this incredible, agonizing prayer of confession and repentance, asking God to forgive the nation's sin and restore the ruined sanctuary.
It is one of the great penitential prayers of the Hebrew Bible. Daniel acknowledges that the exile is the entirely just consequence of Israel's rebellion. He doesn't blame God for their suffering. He begs for unmerited mercy.
But while he is still praying, the angel Gabriel appears to him in swift flight to give him insight. And Gabriel's message is effectively, the physical exile might be ending, but the spiritual exile is not.
Right. He gives Daniel the incredibly complex prophecy of the 70 weeks or 77s.
Okay, let's slow down here. Our source notes this is one of the most highly debated, mathematically confusing texts in the entire book.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I've seen the giant charts that people make trying to map these 70 weeks onto historical days and end times predictions. What is Gabriel actually saying with these 77s?
Gabriel tells Daniel that 77s are decreed for your people in your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place.
Then he breaks the math down into 3 periods, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
7 sevens, 62 sevens, and 1 final 7. In the middle of the final 7, an anointed one will be cut off, and a ruler will come who destroys the city and the sanctuary.
So is it a literal math equation? Like 70 times 7 equals 490 years.
That is exactly where the debate lies. Many traditional and evangelical scholars interpret these 7s as literal years, meaning a 490-year countdown.
Okay, so when does the clock start?
They start the clock at various Persian decrees to rebuild Jerusalem like Artaxerxes' decree in 445 BCE and trace the 69 sevens, or 483 years, directly to the arrival of Jesus Christ as the anointed one who is cut off, meaning crucified.
And what about the final 7?
They then often view the final 7 as either the period of the early church or still future eschatological tribulation.
That is a very precise historical mapping. But what about the other side? Do critical or moderate scholars view the math differently?
Yes, critically, many view the numbers as highly symbolic, a theologically loaded timetable. The number 7 in biblical literature represents completion or divine perfection.
So 77s is like the ultimate completion.
Exactly. It's the ultimate jubilee, the complete perfection of God's timeline. In this view, Gabriel isn't giving Daniel a literal calendar to mark off. He is assuring him that God has a predetermined, perfectly ordered plan.
So the suffering will continue.
The suffering will continue, desolations are decreed, but God is orchestrating history toward a final, absolute consummation where sin will be permanently finished.
It's like Gabriel is saying, the physical return to Jerusalem is only step 1. The true exile, the spiritual exile of humanity from God's presence, the grip of the beasts on the world, is going to take much longer to resolve.
And the sheer, terrifying scale of the conflict behind this timeline is fully revealed in chapter 10.
Right. Daniel has been fasting and mourning for 3 weeks. He has a vision of a terrifying, radiant, heavenly messenger, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches.
The messenger tells Daniel, "I would have come to you sooner, but the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me."
It is a staggering verse. I have to pause here.
Go ahead.
Is the text seriously suggesting that behind every human geopolitical conflict, like the administration of the massive Persian Empire, there is an invisible corresponding spiritual conflict? That the Prince of Persia isn't a human king, but a literal demonic entity?
Yes, entirely. This is the ancient concept of territorial spirits or angelic watchers. The book of Daniel pulls back the veil on human history and says that human wars, the rise and fall of nations, the treaties and the betrayals detailed in chapter 11, are not just politicians moving pieces on a board.
They are the earthly manifestations of a massive, unseen angelic war.
The messenger tells Daniel he now has to go back and fight the Prince of Persia, and after that, the Prince of Greece will come.
And Michael, identified as the angelic prince who protects the Jewish people, is engaged in a literal cosmic struggle against the spiritual forces animating the pagan empires.
That is incredibly heavy.
But it connects to this feeling I think many of you listening have today, this feeling of systemic, unexplainable historical momentum. When you look at the news and you see nations acting with such irrational aggression, or you see systemic injustice that seems utterly impossible to dismantle no matter who is in charge.
Daniel is saying, you are right. It's not just human politics. There are darker spiritual architectures at work.
It is a profound, albeit sobering worldview.
But this is exactly why apocalyptic literature exists. If you only look at the earthly dimension, the oppression by Antiochus or Babylon or Rome, it looks like evil is winning. The beasts are too strong.
So the visions are there to show the real scoreboard.
Yes, the visions are given to assure the faithful that the heavenly war is already decided. The Ancient of Days is on his throne. The outcome is not in doubt, even if the present battle is fierce.
But I have to push back here. These dizzying visions of warfare, empires rising and falling, the sanctuary being desecrated, the constant grinding pressure of history, it could easily induce despair.
It could, yes.
If you are a faithful Judean living through this, getting trampled by Greek armies, you might ask, what is the point? Even if the Son of Man wins eventually in heaven, I am being physically crushed right now on earth.
It's a fair question.
How does this book offer actual hope to someone bleeding out in the streets of Jerusalem?
That is the ultimate question. And the book doesn't end in despair. It drives toward a very specific, radically hopeful conclusion in chapter 12.
Let's talk about chapter 12, because it feels like the climax of the entire theology of the book.
It absolutely is. The heavenly messenger describes a time of unparalleled distress, the absolute climax of the beast's persecution.
But then he delivers one of the most groundbreaking, explicit promises in the entire Old Testament.
Daniel 12, verse 2. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt.
Resurrection, the literal bodily resurrection of the dead.
Yes. And this is a monumental theological shift. The answer to the suffering of the faithful remnant isn't always escaping the lion's den. It isn't always surviving the fiery furnace.
Sometimes the faithful are martyred.
Sometimes the empire kills them. If physical death is the end of the story, then the empire truly has the ultimate power.
But Daniel 12 introduces the ultimate defeat of the empire's power.
It says that physical death is not the final verdict. The righteous who die under the crushing weight of the beast will wake up. They will rise from the dust to receive their inheritance in the everlasting kingdom, while the wicked rulers who thought they got away with their crimes will wake up to eternal shame and judgment.
That changes everything. It means your actions matter eternally, not just temporally. The faithful who refuse to compromise, the wise, the text says they will shine like the brightness of the heavens.
This thread of resurrection, this thread of the divine Son of Man, it leads directly to the present. Because as our source highlights, Daniel lays the absolute groundwork for the New Testament and for Christology.
You fundamentally cannot understand the New Testament without the book of Daniel.
No, you can't. When Jesus of Nazareth arrives, he does not primarily call himself the Son of David or the Messiah. His favorite, most frequently used self-designation is the Son of Man.
Which goes right back to Daniel 7.
Exactly. When he is on trial for his life before the high priest in Matthew 26, and they demand to know if he is the Messiah, Jesus replies, "From now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven."
He is quoting Daniel 7 directly. He is standing as a prisoner of the earthly empire and telling the high priest, "I am the human figure who shares the divine throne. I am the one who will judge the beasts."
And the high priest immediately tears his clothes and accuses Jesus of blasphemy because he knows exactly what Daniel 7 means. He knows Jesus is claiming divine authority over all nations.
Wow.
Furthermore, the imagery from Nebuchadnezzar's dream back in chapter 2, the stone cut without human hands that strikes the statue of the empires and becomes a massive mountain filling the whole earth, that becomes the foundational imagery for the kingdom of God that Jesus preaches.
A kingdom that is not built by human military force, not built by political coercion, but inaugurated by God himself. So what does this all mean? We have talked about the Aramaic sandwich, the historical timelines, the terrifying beasts, the cosmic war, and resurrection. Let's bring this ancient, complex text down to the ground for you, the listener. How does a book about Babylonian exile apply to your modern life?
I think the most practical theological application is that Daniel normalizes the experience of marginalization.
That's a great way to put it.
If you are trying to live faithfully to God in a culture that does not share your values, a culture that wants to re-educate you, redefine your identity, and coerce your worship, Daniel says, "This is normal. Do not be surprised. You are in exile."
The book is a manual for principled nonconformity.
It teaches you how to serve with excellence within compromised institutions, just as Daniel served Babylon and Persia, without ever giving those institutions your ultimate
It
allegiance.
teaches you how to be an excellent employee, a good citizen, someone who seeks the peace of the city, but drawing a hard, unyielding line when the state or the corporation asks for your soul.
It tells you to keep your windows open toward Jerusalem, to maintain your daily rhythms of prayer and faithfulness, even when the cultural decrees say otherwise.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is vital to remember the true purpose of apocalyptic literature.
Apocalyptic texts like Daniel and Revelation are not given to us to create a speculative frenzy. They are not meant to be decoded like a subway map to predict the exact date of the end of the world.
Right. It's not a crystal ball for geopolitics.
As our source explicitly notes, apocalyptic literature is meant to produce endurance, holiness, and hope under extreme pressure. It pulls back the curtain to show you that heaven rules, so that you have the courage to face the furnace on earth.
That is such an important corrective. It's about how to live faithfully right now, not just guessing what happens tomorrow. And it's worth noting briefly, as Britannica points out, that these stories of endurance resonated so deeply in Jewish history that later Greek traditions actually added more stories to the Daniel collection.
Right, the apocryphal editions.
Yeah, the prayer of Azariah, the story of Susanna and Bel and the Dragon, while these aren't in the standard Protestant canon today, they show just how hungry the community was for models of people who stood up to corrupt, abusive power and trusted in God's vindication.
They cement Daniel's legacy as the ultimate paradigm of wisdom and courage in exile.
What a journey. We started with deported teenagers refusing the king's food as a radical act of resistance.
We decoded cryptic Aramaic messages on the walls of an arrogant, drunken feast.
We watched the most powerful king on earth eat grass like a cow. We shifted from the gritty reality of the Babylonian court to cosmic visions of mutant beasts rising from the chaotic sea, only to be judged by the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man.
We saw the incredible promise that history is not just an endless, meaningless cycle of violence, but is moving toward a specific climax of bodily resurrection and eternal justice.
It is a text that forces you, the reader, to decide where your true citizenship lies. Is it with the temporary empire of the present or the everlasting kingdom of the future?
That's the ultimate choice it presents.
I want to leave you with a final thought, circling back to where we started. Remember the thought experiment. You are the captive, relocated to the hostile capital. You've lived your whole life in the shadow of this empire. And the incredible thing about the book of Daniel is that the story doesn't end with a massive political revolution.
No, it doesn't.
Daniel doesn't raise an army and overthrow Babylon or Persia. He doesn't even get to return to Jerusalem when the exile ends. He lives out his entire long life and dies as a captive in a foreign land.
A lifetime in exile.
The very last instruction he receives from the heavenly messenger in chapter 12 is surprisingly simple. The angel doesn't tell him to fight the beast. He simply says, "As for you, go your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of the days you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance."
Just go your way.
In a modern world that is completely obsessed with building personal empires, winning political victories, and controlling the narrative, what would it look like for you to simply go your way? To live with quiet integrity, do your daily work, say your prayers, and trust that the true kingdom, the stone cut without human hands, is already on its way.